When comparing Rolex and Omega, especially in depth, there are crucial differences that are often overlooked, yet really matter when choosing between them. That's why today we'll compare both brands across the key categories such as the impact they had on the industry, collection, engineering, movements, and pricing. So if you're wondering what those differences are and what you might have missed, stick with me as we break it all down today. Hello everyone and welcome back to Watchmaker with a new episode to which I was really looking forward because this comparison between these two watch brands highlights some major differences that are often overlooked but are very essential to understand before deciding which one to choose. Now, one thing is undeniable. Both brands have played a major role in shaping the watch industry, especially in contributing through technical innovation, and this is where our comparison journey starts today. If you look at both brands, their impact stretches into pop culture, sports, exploration, and even how society perceives a mechanical watch today. Beyond the cultural influence, both brands have played a crucial role in shaping the wristwatch as we know today, raising the question of which had the greater technical impact. While both innovated, Rolex often led the way, especially in key mechanical breakthroughs, and it starts with the accuracy and the chronometer certification. Because in 1910, a Rolex wristwatch became the first to receive an official chronometer certificate in Bienne, proving that small wristwatches could match the precision of traditional pocket watches. Just a few years later, Omega followed with the Centenary in 1948 and the Constellation in 1952, establishing a large-scale production of officially certified chronometers. But Rolex did not only lead in accuracy, it also redefined the utility of the wristwatch when in 1926 Rolex introduced the Oyster, its first truly waterproof wristwatch case, preceding Omega's Marine in 1932, which back then reached 135 meters using a double case design. Besides the accuracy and waterproof race which Rolex won, Rolex was the first of these two brands to introduce a self-winding chronometer with an automatically changing date window, while Omega did not introduce a date function until 1952 with the Seamaster calendar. So in short, in most cases we have to admit Rolex reached key milestones before Omega, even though Omega later won numerous prizes for its achievements and set several records in terms of accuracy. But what really sets Rolex apart in this regard is one achievement that changed and shaped the industry forever, which was the defining moment in 1931 when Rolex developed and patented the world's first self-winding mechanism with a perpetual rotor. Now, this system remains at the heart of almost every modern automatic watch and solved a crucial problem related to automatic winding. So in my view, I think this achievement alone gives Rolex a clear edge in terms of influence on modern watchmaking, even though Omega's introduction of the coaxial escapement in 1999 was a truly remarkable achievement as well. However, the invention itself originated with George Daniels, and while Omega had the resources to industrialize and perfect it, this innovation did not trigger a universal shift across the industry in the same way the perpetual rotor did. Now, this gives a good idea of each brand's historical path and achievements, but at the end of the day, people may favor one brand over the other because of history, even though the past doesn't directly matter today. What really matters now and where things start to get interesting is when it comes to their collection, and this is where Omega takes the upper hand. The past has undeniably shaped both brands and made them what they are today. This influence becomes especially clear when we look at their current collection lineups, and when you assess those collections as a whole, this is where Omega begins to pull ahead. At Omega, there are 4 key collections, and each looking really different from the others, meaning the main collections already offer a lot of versatility, but it gets especially interesting when you dive deeper into each collection. Take the Seamaster collection, for example, which contains 265 references to choose from, and most of them look quite different from each other. And if we deep dive into the Seamaster collection, we meet the Aquaterra 150 line, where we find a lot of options, not just in colors and materials, but also in functionality. Because you can have certain models with a small second hand, a GMT complication, or decide if you want the date or not. It's not just the Seamaster Aquaterra, this is how Omega approaches all of its collections. filled with versatility both in design and function. Something else I do personally find really amazing about Omega is how they create pieces dedicated to specific events like the Olympics or special watches such as the CK859, which has actually become one of my favorite Omega watches since its release 3 years ago. For me, this actually makes Omega feel more personal and gives the brand a sense of connection with its community. And I think this says a lot about how Omega approaches the maintenance of their collections, because they have built a portfolio that is not only wide but also deep, offering buyers genuine choices. And I believe this approach also makes it more likely for someone to stick with the brand and invest in multiple watches over time. Now at Rolex things were completely different, because if you look at their current lineup, they have 15 active collections, and what is immediately noticeable is how similar they all look. I mean, they have such a heavy style DNA across all watches. Of course, I know this strong DNA is what has made Rolex such a super recognizable cult brand, but honestly, it really limits your options when choosing a Rolex watch, and I think this is one of the reasons why Rolex has so many one-time buyers. Of course, if you dive deeper into their collections, you can configure your watch in terms of case materials, dial, bezel, which gives you a higher number of possible combinations. Even with these options, the depth isn't really there, to be honest, because no matter how you configure a Rolex, they all end up looking very similar across the board, without any extra functionalities to choose from. On top of all that, Rolex has a very rigid and strict approach in terms of releases and never offers special pieces dedicated to events like Omega does, which can make Rolex feel a bit cold, static and distant. But I think what has saved Rolex from this rigid DNA is the fact that they simply have more iconic pieces in their lineup, like the GMT, Day-Date or Yachtmaster, that are often reasons why a client might return and buy multiple watches. But as exciting as this might sound, we all know Rolex removed that advantage by creating a really ridiculous long waiting list, which is also sometimes a reason people eventually choose Omega over Rolex. So in short, I do think Omega clearly wins in terms of collections because they have built a versatile lineup that offers both width and depth, while still adding a personal touch through the special edition watches they release along the way. The next category, however, is purely numbers and facts, because it focuses on engineering and answers the question, is there a real difference in quality and technical execution, and if so, what exactly are those differences? This reputation did not come about by accident. It is the direct result of a long and consistent pursuit of quality, a principle upon which both brands were founded. But the key question is this: which brand is more advanced in terms of engineering today, and how do we measure that without being biased? And the answer is actually pretty simple. I would start by counting the patents of each brand, as this already gives a clear idea of their innovation output and engineering focus. So after looking into both brands, the numbers speak for themselves, because for instance, Omega has around 200 granted patents, while Rolex has over 600. And something that in my view really says it all. Of course, we need to be cautious with these numbers, since they don't always reflect the true impact of an invention. And I'm saying this because some of Rolex patents, like the older rotating bezel or dial designs, were largely incremental or aesthetic, protecting execution rather than introducing groundbreaking innovations. Nevertheless, out of Rolex roughly 600 granted patents, the majority are meaningful technical achievements that improve performance, such as the chronergy escapement or the helium escape valve, which are both major inventions, just to name a few. On the other hand, Omega might have fewer patents, yet their innovations often bring significant change, like for instance the coaxial escapement, which remains remarkable today, because in watchmaking, complexity isn't the main challenge. Making something complex reliable, efficient and scalable is. What I mean by that is, taking such a complex feature and making it work reliably was beyond what was thought possible decades ago. And I think this is where Rolex in the past fell short, giving Omega an edge in the world of escapements, but only until this year, because as you know, things changed when Rolex introduced the Dynapulse escapement at Watches and Wonders. Still, we have to wait and see how this performs over time in real life, but for now I think Omega in this regard remains one step ahead commercially, because for now only one Rolex collection features the Dynapulse escapement, while Omega's coaxial spans all their collections. And this brings us back to the question we started with in this section and provides the answer: Where do both brands stand today? In short, I truly believe Rolex is all about engineering, and they have an obsession with pushing science and invention further than any other brand in the industry. But most importantly, they apply the same level of attention to every part of the watch, the case, bracelet, dial, movement, and every other aspect. But when it comes to Omega, their approach is a bit different. They may not have the same sheer volume of patents or the same obsessive scope as Rolex, and perhaps not the same depth either, but I feel they are more selective. What I mean by that is, if Rolex sees an opportunity to improve something by even 2%, they will probably pursue it, while Omega might only invest in innovations if they make a significant difference. And I think one obvious reason for this is that Rolex resources are much larger. So who is more advanced in terms of engineering if you consider all of this? Now, as we have seen, Rolex wins this category, not just compared to Omega, but across the industry, because they obsessively invest in anything that could make a difference, even incremental improvements on a scale unmatched in watchmaking. But does this mean Omega is lower quality? And I say absolutely not, because from my experience, both brands deliver outstanding quality. And I would say with Grand Seiko together, they form today the holy trinity of reliability and endurance in the industry. Now, as important as engineering is, when it comes to the movement alone, other factors also matter for the buyer, because between Omega and Rolex, there are indeed some meaningful differences which matter. But as we will see in a moment, these differences actually work in each brand's favor, because each of them offers something the other simply doesn't. From a movement perspective, both brands offer clear but very different advantages. For instance, Omega leans toward visible watchmaking innovation, while Rolex leads on measurable performance. For example, in terms of accuracy, Rolex standard of -2 + 2 seconds per day allows a maximum daily deviation of 4 seconds. Omega's meta standard permits 0 + 5 seconds per day, resulting in a slightly wider 5-second window, but considering anti-magnetism up to 15,000 Gauss. So overall the difference is small, but objectively Rolex tolerances are tighter, and that's a statistic that matters. And that triggers the question, does Omega's anti-magnetic advantage matter more to you than Rolex's slightly better timekeeping tolerance? Now, to make it more interesting and more detailed, I have compared their most widely used movements, and there are some differences that matter besides accuracy. For instance, their frequency, because the Rolex 3235 runs at 4 Hz, while Omega's 8900 runs at 3.5 Hz. And it is not a myth that higher frequency movements generally perform better, although I can't say exactly how much a 0.5 Hz difference matters in real life. But what is measurable and makes a difference is that the Rolex 3235 offers a 72-hour power reserve, while the Omega 8900 has around 60 hours. So considering the Hertz accuracy and the power reserve, the difference are quite small, but nevertheless they are factual and they can make a big impact together. Now, where the comparison becomes less measurable is in the concept of watchmaking. Here, Omega arguably does more, largely due to the widespread use of the unique coaxial escapement across all its collection. And when combined with full meta certification, more intense movement decoration, and a broader use of complications, Omega offers a higher level of visible watchmaking content. But this raises the core question, what actually defines watchmaking? Because for some it's about measurable performance and the stats, while others argue that if time can be read more accurately on an Apple Watch, then watchmaking must be about mechanical features and complexity instead. Yes, it is a debate that will probably never be settled, but fact is, a greater mechanical complexity or more watchmaking does not automatically mean higher quality, as we have seen today. Because in terms of stats, Rolex achieves better results with less complexity, which I think proves what I just said. So in this regard, if you value visible watchmaking more than pure stats, Omega is clearly the way to go when it comes to movements. If on the other hand you are more of a numbers-driven person who prefers simplicity and a more clinical result-oriented approach, then Rolex is indeed the better fit. So far we have covered the impact both brands have had in the industry, their collection and their level of engineering and movements. And this was really important because it makes it easier to see if the price differences are truly justified based on everything we have discussed today. In terms of pricing, once we compare the average prices, we notice a significant gap between these two brands, because Omega sits around 7,000 on average, while Rolex is almost double at roughly 13,000. Of course, we have to keep in mind that this is also influenced by the fact that Rolex offers more gold watches in their assortment, as well as many stainless steel models with white gold bezels and diamond dial markers, which push the average price higher. So this alone does not show the full picture because it also depends on the features of each watch, which are not reflected here. And that's why I think it makes sense to compare two similar models from each brand in depth, because then we start to see something quite interesting. For example, if we compare the Daytona with the Speedmaster, we notice quite a few differences in terms of features, and the price gap suddenly becomes very noticeable. But the question is it justified? So if you look at my chart, I have selected some key features that I think matter the most when comparing these watches, and I have marked the ones in green or red depending on which side wins. So at first glance, the Daytona has in some cases simply the better features and wins when we compare them side by side. But the real question is this: does this huge price difference really justify these subtle extra features? I mean, purely based on these numbers on paper, it does not seem logical to see such a large price gap between the two. And honestly, if it were not for the Daytona's resale value, the Speedmaster would be even a much better option as it stands today. But now here's the problem: these extra features might seem subtle and may look like they do not justify the price difference at first glance. But the problem is this: we also do not know how much research, development time and overall resources Rolex invested to achieve exactly this level of refinement. Eventually, the value of these extra features is something only you can decide based on how much they matter to you. And look, this example is indeed an extreme case, but once we start comparing the regular pieces in their collections, things suddenly look a bit different. And a good example of this is when we compare the Aquaterra 150 to the Oyster Perpetual, which I think aim for the same buyer. Now, interestingly, the price gap here is almost nothing, so the price in this case is not the crucial factor and won't influence the buying decision. So here again, on paper, Rolex offers more extra features, which in this case become even more valuable, since both watches are almost at the same price level. But the problem is, I do not think that the amount of extra features matter, but rather the impact of a single one. What I mean is, if you truly care about your watch being anti-magnetic, you might be willing to pass on some of the extra features that the Rolex offers. But on the other hand, if your priority is the resale value, then of course you would likely choose the Rolex. Nevertheless, if we are honest and compare the Omega and Rolex watches, Omega may offer fewer features, but they are more significant. So in this case, I really believe Omega has overall clearly the advantage in terms of pricing and wins, in my opinion, this category. Now, after having rated these two indeed remarkable brands head to head, we see indeed a difference, not only in terms of pricing, but in various areas. So the question remains, which one does win if you consider all of this? And here's my honest summary. The comparison isn't about declaring a winner between Rolex and Omega, but about giving a fact-based foundation for a smarter buying decision. Because as we have seen, these brands are not so similar as it is often said. Rolex stands out for deeper engineering, focus, iconic models, relentless incremental innovation, and a strong resale value. But all of that for a higher price, a restricted availability, and a rigid brand image that can feel less personal. On the other hand, Omega might be slightly less obsessive in engineering depth, has a weaker resale value, and contains less iconic models in their lineup. But compared to Rolex, they offer a broader collection, a widespread use of the cocktail escapement, and in general more watchmaking, paired with a personal and more community-oriented brand identity. So in short, there is no single winner because neither brand leads in every category, as they do not compete but complement each other, and this is what makes the Omega versus Rolex debate so fascinating. So with that said, it's time to wrap up today's episode, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you own any of these brands, and what made you choose the one you did? In the meantime, if you haven't already, hit the like button and subscribe for more watchmaking related content. But most importantly, I wish you all happy holidays, stay blessed, and see you next time.